we're going to kind of kick off this first part of the conversation of this panel with a question that I hope everyone has an answer for. So in curating this show, Saul talked about creating events, which appear as kind of these configurations. If we all kind of look around the room, of course, many of us have been here and seen the show already or have work in it, but these configurations that we see. And it struck me as a rather different concept than the autonomous art object. And so my question is, how does your work change in relation to the event?
Who goes first?
Yeah.
Well, I think my work is centered in the event, actually, because a lot of my work I consider to be performative. And before I go on about that, I wanted to just give you my observation about the events and these groupings, and what Saul has managed to do here, in my opinion, was to actually make us forget about the makers of these works and just concentrate on what the works have to say to each other within the group and group to group. And that itself is, I believe, a departure from what we would consider a norm in viewing works.
A bit more collective in a way.
It's a collective, and I think that the ideas in a collective become more numerous to discuss as opposed to the singular, right? So in making my work, the idea of an event is the actual process in which I engage in to bring the work into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just looking at the grouping that I'm in, I was thinking about it today, and I think my work toggles between, bringing the material forward and then sort of hinting at an image or a picture. But with the works around it, I think that there became this drawing out of the repetition and the sort of repetition and materiality of my work because of what was surrounding it. And then I also thought, when you have groupings like this, it becomes about scale, and your choice of scale all of a sudden is very apparent, So I really enjoyed that.
My work that's hanging there actually wasn't the piece that Saul originally chose that was presented, because when he chose it, I couldn't find it. It disappeared. I had put it in a very safe place. And after it was photographed, so I was in trouble. So I had to create the piece again, which I did from memory. So that was the first event. And I really would love to see it compared to the other one, the first one, but I haven't yet found it. The other thing is that in the catalog and on the list, the photograph is of the first piece. And the title is of the first piece, which is called Monk Space, which came from a stupid little line out of Finnegan's Wake, just by chance choosing that. So that title refers to a certain attitude about that painting. Whereas the new painting that's in this show now has a new title called Provisional Emblem. So that completely changed the meaning of the painting for me. I don't know, titles for me are important. And the second thing that Saul did by pairing me with Gilbert Sau, it was a fierce pairing. Like, it's really fierce. Gilbert really knocks me out of the water there. So it became very interesting for me to look at the work and then cover Gilbert and look at it with the work below it and the work, so I started seeing it very differently in the relationship. And I could see why he related us, because we're both central and we're both green and black and et cetera, but very different experiences. So that So there was a lot of events for me around this curation.
Yeah. And in addition to the event, I think we have a situation
Yes.
as well, right?
We have a situation.
So the situation is, exposing a lot of other ways to view work and
Yes.
discuss it.
Yeah.
Well, something that struck me is that there's a bunch of vignettes in here. Each kind of grouping kind of proposes a configuration quite unlike the next to it. And then we have moments where maybe a work is a bit more isolated. I think of this kind of vignette over here where we have Dorothea Rockburn, a little bit more isolated from some of the others. Marthe, I also hope Saul knows how much of a labor of love you put in for this exhibition.
He doesn't know. He doesn't realize.
He does now. It's something about the way that we think about a vignette as well is the way in which that might speak to contemporary culture in a way, because it's not like it's a salon style hang, right? But it's also not just moment to moment to moment. But the way in which we're unfortunately constantly distracted, constantly looking at maybe multiple sources of visual imagery, in addition to maybe looking at art, the amount of people who walk into a gallery with their cell phone open, just for instance, right? And I think this is something obviously that a lot of people have thought about. I think about that show that took place maybe about 12 years ago at MoMA, that painting in an atemporal world that Laura Hopman put together, where it was like multiple spaces, the Forever Now. Perhaps some of you remember that show. And anyways, I think Saul's is more interesting in many ways, proposes different kinds of questions, particularly because this is an abstract moment, but that kind of segues us maybe into the second question a bit, which is, what moves us towards abstraction? And I think a lot about visual culture. We're in this moment where we have image saturation with social media and the internet. We have mass surveillance. We have this thing that everyone loves called AI, right? We're all just huge fans. It's worth asking, given all of these really quite destructive and complex technologies that we're facing, what moves us towards abstraction? Why abstraction now? Obviously, this is a group show that kind of encompasses a lot of abstract painters, and this is the kind of nature of this group. But what makes it pertinent? What makes it important, perhaps maybe now more than, let's say, at the founding of this group?
Who wants to take that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the aspects is everything that we're looking at online is purporting to give us a reality, a truth, to tell us this is the right lotion to use for your face, and this is the right person to elect as a candidate. And I think abstraction is not claiming to have the absolute truth or the absolute reality. So it's like, it's very much doing something outside of all of that. Most of the time. Of course, some abstract work looks really good on Instagram, but I think generally, it's taking us somewhere that's a question. So that's one reason.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about time and how trying to teach at Hunter a foundation class, and the students are very resistant to abstraction. And so trying to present it in a way that makes sense to them, I was researching it and thinking what is it anyway? What's the difference? I see it as Saul sees it as a continuum. I don't see it as an opposition of realism. All painting is abstract. So just to start from. But I came across a study that happened at Columbia University about how the brain changes when looking at abstraction. And I found that really interesting. And I thought, let me change their brains,
Yeah.
How do I change their brains? Really, that was the question for me, and teaching them. So, I tried all kinds of tricks, like, trying to draw like a still life from memory, putting it outside the room. That was a Susanna Coffey assignment, set it up outside and then come back in and draw it. Or there were a million things, and then there's just now I saw a great show, if you haven't seen it, of Bruce Nauman at Okie Dokie.
Yeah, it is a great show.
What's it called? The German gallery.
Conrad Fisher.
Right. Okie Dokie Conrad Fisher is a new gallery on White Street, 6 White Street, and I just saw the show, which is you put on 3D glasses and you immerse yourself into him doing these drawings with silver point and gold point, and you almost doing the drawings. But the thing I loved was there's a drawing right by the front door, which is of a still life of bottles that he did with his eyes closed. And it's terrific. It's a beautiful drawing and stuff like that, about that. So, but what I wanted to get back to about time in this study, the thing that kind of excited the students, the idea, they read the study, I made them read it, and they understood that, they learned that people who didn't have anything to do with art were asked to look at this painting and that painting and think about curating a show around this or that, and when would you want to do it? And the ones that were looking at super realism wanted to do it immediately. They wanted to do the show right away, and they got it, right? And the abstract work, they were like, let's do that next year, because that takes time. They actually got that it takes more time to look at abstract work, and that it's a different way of looking. It's global. It's not like, oh, I get that's a foot and that's a nose, It's global, and you're looking at it in a different way that actually it is readable in the brain. They can see the difference. So that is what got the students, that idea of time, that they slow down, which they never do. They're running mile a minute, and you have to actually slow down. So,
well, and that the idea that we might be rewarded by slowing down, right?
Yes,
is that
exactly.
Is that part of the culture? I guess
Yes,
is kind of baked
yes.
into what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Russell, did you have something that you wanted to share with that?
Just that, the idea of slowing down is really important because I think it's about seeing and feeling what you're observing. And when you look at something that you recognize, right, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I recognize that. So all these, things, the things that you already, pre-associations happen, and you might not be totally engaged, an abstract work or an abstract painting or sculpture or even anything conceptual offers you a series of propositions, right? And those propositions kind of like take time to first observe, know they're there, and then, get into like maybe enjoying what you're looking at and kind of getting into it and being challenged. I know that's what I tried to do in my own studio is with myself, is to challenge what I know. Exactly. Otherwise, why do it?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, and that seems like the counterpoint to this moment in many ways, that kind of presents a lot of information, a lot of visual imagery in terms that are perhaps accessible, efficient, trying to kind of just get us to the conclusion as quickly as possible. Yeah. And that this time thing that has just been brought up feels like the antidote to all of that. I'm curious because, this was brought up as well, this old story between narrative work and abstract work, representation and abstraction. And obviously that has been hashed out many a time. But something that I'm thinking about is the way in which we think, or if we think there is a firm line between something that's narrative here and something that is purely abstract. It's about the optical experience and a kind of phenomenological experience that happens in front of a painting. I know some of our panelists are interested in subject matter, and that too can be tricky. In the past few years, we've seen artists abstract painters, for instance, try to tackle everything from post-colonialism to race to identity, you name it, it's on the table, technology. How important is it for each of you as artists and as makers, as thinkers in the world, how important is it that the content that you have behind your work be visible, be accessible to an audience, and how much of that is open for interpretation?
Well, I could say that basically it doesn't matter to me, okay, at all.
Even the interpretation?
Either way,
Oh.
anything about it, I have a set of things that I work with that I really am challenged by in terms of perception and identification of what a painting is, or what art is, or what abstraction is, and basically I take a material that I find that everybody can identify with and knows what it is, right? I take another material which comes out of a can. It's paint, emulsion, coating. I apply one to the other. I get a new material. I get a new thing. All right. So there's this transformation, and for me, the transformation, kind of like, it surpasses the narrative, or even the need for the narrative, because the experience is more important than the narrative, for me. And yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like sort of along those lines, but a little bit different. Like, it's more important to me to be able to bring somebody along on my exploration of painting and abstract, and also like exploration of what a painting is and what human exist. I mean, this is so lofty, not really, but like every painting I feel like is a little bit of an exploration of like, what is human perception? So I'd rather open people up to that than be like, okay, I have a set idea of what you should be getting here,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that the interest in abstraction is more that it's new. It's never been seen before. It's not trying to, I don't know. It should be anyway. It should be a surprise in some way to the maker, at least, or it should be. I want to, like you said, I want to see something new in the studio. Otherwise, that's kind of why I took a great big break, because every single time I get good at something, I quit. It's like, okay, I can do that. Now what? I turn out tons of those,
right.
I mean, it's a good thing for your market. It's really bad for your market to quit. But I wanted to do something to surprise myself, So there's that. But there's also trying not to influence the viewer. I try to hold my tongue in the studio, because I do have a narrative about the painting, about the color, about the story behind it, about where I found the whatever, I found this pigment in an old box that my father left in his studio, that kind of thing. You don't have to tell them all that. It's all there. It's in there. If somebody wants to dig deep, they can find all the story about it, but it should stand on its own, I really think. It tells its own narrative. And it also, in relation to the things around it, the French idea of tableau, which still needs to be dealt with in America, I think is really relevant to this show.
It's not didactic, is kind of what you're saying. You're not instructing the audience in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm not. I'm trying not to.
Right.
Yeah, go back to what Liz said about finding out what a painting can be.
Yeah.
Like every time you get started, it's like, now what can it be?
Yeah.
Right. And that's when I think it becomes most successful, is when you let it be what it wants to be. And not kind of corny, but it's true in that way.
But I do think there's always a struggle as to like, how much do you want to let people in? And I think information about how you made it, or what associations you have, I think maybe because of the history of abstract painting, maybe we've been resistant to that a bit. Like, oh no, it should just completely exist on its own, and everyone is going to come to it and be, blown away with its presence. And it's like, Well, context is important, and especially for people who aren't trained in art. So there is always like a little bit of that. How much? How little? How, it's a dance, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marty.
I was just going to say, but in terms of narrative, which was the way you framed it, it's because I mean, talking about the propositions and the ideas in it is a whole other thing in a way, unless that's part of the narrative.
Right, right. Well, something that you brought up, or a couple of you brought up actually, is something that I was thinking about when reading Saul's essay too. He made this distinction between abstract and abstraction and kind of talking about those back and forth. And I've also heard a little bit about this idea of like surprise, and baked into that is like the hope of maybe even a little bit of progress, that you as an artist might get somewhere and that you might also surprise your audience. So is that still on the table? This sense that, hey, look, not everything's said and done, and this issue of abstraction and the abstract, these are all still viable. Is that more or less kind of where you land, or do you have other thoughts there?
When I look at this show, I'm very surprised, actually. I see a lot of this work in a new light. I don't see all the vertical stripes together. You see very interesting.
So one of the most exciting things about this show is that it's fresh.
It's fresh.
It's a fresh vision. You're given the opportunity to have a fresh vision about works that you may have seen individually, or set at the 60 inches on center thing, boom, boom, boom around the room. And like we were talking about earlier, it's a refreshing way to view things and opens up a whole new dialogue about possibility, right? So.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking about, I think your question goes a little bit at like, what is the place of abstract art and abstraction now? And it's interesting thinking about American Abstract Artist, how it was founded to basically insert abstract art into the dialogue so long ago. I feel like now our job is so different, because I think in the context of so much artwork that may be illustrating a concept or an idea, where do we fit in, and how do we fight against the idea that abstract art is decorative, part of the market only something that galleries want to sell, but it's not serious, So we're actually like, again, in this moment where we need to sort of say, yes, we actually are making, relevant, serious work, and here's why. And I think it's that like presence that the work has in person, and the slowness and all of these things that we're talking about,
Well, Marty, you brought up students, and I think obviously everybody I think on the stage has taught or does teach, and something that's interesting is the way in which you were talking about how students don't have the same reception towards abstraction. There's skepticism. There's a lot of things in the way. Something I've kind of even experienced.
American students,
perhaps more of our U.S. Students than others. Something I've experienced is the idea that perhaps this is just about your aesthetics. You're only interested in this color, this materiality, this process, and that's all that abstraction is. It actually doesn't point to anything else. And well, I wanted to talk about me, or I wanted to talk about something in the world, something external, and that they miss perhaps this point in which abstraction can be about a sensibility, about a way of being in the world, demonstrated through those aesthetics. Well, these are the things I'm attracted to. These are my instincts, or the things that I kind of derive from them, and I'm using them to kind of like suggest something about who I am, what my experience has been. So do you feel like in that kind of definition that, in fact, it's loaded with this idea about identity in quotes in that way? Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I studied art therapy. I can look at a painting and I know who you are, whether it's abstract or not, or a sculpture or whatever. We keep forgetting sculpture, but there is some of that around.
We can see some part of you, some self-disclosure.
Part of you,
yeah, right.
At least, or some, I mean, that's not really true, but sort of. At least with students, it's always true.
Well, I think the same is true of representation, in that it's like,
Yes.
well, we're not getting the full picture here. We're not going back to like day one of you being born and all the
Yeah.
stories thereafter. We're getting a sliver of
Yeah.
some part of who you are, and that distinction seems to that seems to be murky right now. We do have this sense that somehow representation it actually somehow captures more of one's person, one's subjectivity. And that, again, abstraction is, like you're saying, Liz, maybe fighting to try to kind of assert itself. Whereas I think you're right, that distinction was reversed. Maybe some 60, 70 years ago, we may have thought the opposite in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, like we're not radical. We're not seen as radical. We're seen as traditional.
Right.
You know, and so what do we do with that? But like, I don't know, this is making me think about like when I look at a Duccio, you know, it's not because I'm like, oh yes, Jesus on the mount. Yeah, I really relate to that, you know, religious story. No, it's something about the way it was painted and the colors and everything. And like color itself, like what are we going to abandon color because it's unquantifiable? Like, no, it's very relevant to everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, good question.
Well, so something else I'm thinking about is the role of emotion in abstract art. I have this question. Really, this philosopher Alva Noe, who's kind of become a little bit more well known in some artistic circles in the last few years, but he's argued that bodies and emotions form artistic and scientific practices. So he's like, it's running this total spectrum, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. So my question is, does the practice of abstract art and the emotions that it evokes, does that act as a form of knowing in the world, a kind of form of knowledge, of like self-knowledge in a way? I know something about myself. I know something about my world around me vis-a-vis making a painting.
Can you reframe that a little?
Yeah, so like the emotions that are there, I know it's kind of convoluted, the emotions that are there for us as makers, and the way that there are obviously parts of that are fully conscious, hey, I set out to kind of do this thing, and then parts that are totally unconscious. Does the practice of that, the emotions that a painting invokes for ourselves, for others, does that act as a form of like knowing, oh, I know somehow something about how you feel as an artist. I understand something about your emotional life vis-a-vis this painting? Or do you feel like, no, actually it's really just, it's formal things, it's logical, it's material, it's whatever emotion somebody gets there, that's for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of a continuum, you know, even for each person in a way. Sometimes my work is kind of, you know, it feels more personal, say, than emotional maybe, than other times, or more easy to read and less pure, perhaps. I don't know. The purer it gets, the cooler it gets, kind of emotionally in a way. But even that tells a lot about a person, you know. I don't know. I think it's, I don't have an
Yeah, it's such an individual,
answer,
it's
yeah.
such an individual specific, thing, right?
like you wouldn't do it if it didn't feel good, right?
Right.
Not
right.
necessarily.
Oh, really? Well, it's true. It depends who you are. Yeah.
Depends who you are.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah,
the whole.
yeah.
I think the whole idea is like it's this wide open situation,
Yeah.
time and space, and the presence of being in a place to start
the
making
wall or
the
the
work,
floor,
right? And
yeah.
then there's all kinds of emotions that happen. That's natural. We're human beings, right? And when the work happens, more emotions happen, and then people see it, right? So when people see it, they're going to have a reaction, and it's never, guaranteed it's going to be what you expect. It shouldn't be. It is what it is. But it's a good question about the emotional thing, because it's in certain ways, the idea of art concrete, right, is abstract. And that basically it was a reaction to take the emotion out of the making and systematize the way something's made in a systematic way, very reductive, very reduced. So the elements are the elements that you see are self-referential to themselves and to nothing else, right?
Yeah.
I've met a lot of those artists, and they are very emotional people.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Exactly.
I don't think I don't think that it can be just written off as one thing or another.
Well, it's interesting.
Happily so, actually. You know.
I mean, I think some of the craziest people make some of the purest art.
Yeah, good. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, I was
It's
just going to
actually
say,
a-
yeah.
But who's crazy? What does crazy mean? What does crazy mean?
Stable, maybe.
What does that mean, unstable? I mean,
You know, I'm not naming names.
okay, good. Tell me later.
Well, I think that what that philosopher is talking about is maybe like hinting at a shift that's happening again with abstraction, because it's like, I don't know, when I was in school, I did feel this hesitance to admit to any kind of emotional connection or anything that I was trying to express. And I think that came out of the art historicization of Abek's work and of minimalism, and okay, your work, you make it and then it exists over here. And now I think people are starting to look back at other work that was abstract, that's maybe spiritual, maybe from other cultures, and work that, I mean, you think of Hilma of Klint, and what is the purpose of that work? Or even like anonymous paintings made in India by tantric practices. Like it's abstract if you look at it. So what is, maybe we need to rethink this purpose of making abstract work.
Well, there's something that Russell mentioned about that last question being very individual. Like, how does one even begin to approach that? It's so subjective, maybe on a certain level. And it made me think about your own respective work, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what it is you feel like. I know surprise has come up, and progress, a number of things. What do you feel like beyond that as an element is something that you're kind of grappling with in the studio as an abstract artist that you feel like is relevant, meaningful, continues to bring you back there?
Maybe I was just thinking, trying not to repeat myself too much, except when I have to, like for this show. But trying to surprise myself, I guess. I mean, grappling with trying to find new ideas in this, but then realizing that I did that before. You know what I mean? I think I'm making something new, and then I look back to the 80s, and I think I did that, something very close to that then. So you have a certain vocabulary that you keep recycling, I guess. It keeps coming up, and it's unconscious. It's in there.
So it sounds kind of like a bit of a language for you.
Yeah,
like you've found
it's a
language,
language,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's also finding what, I think the older I get, the more I feel comfortable with letting the universe bring me what it wants, kind of, and allowing, using what comes up. A lot more chance. Well, it's always had a lot of chance, but accepting that, it's gonna, I'll find what I need for that painting. It'll come up, even if maybe it takes a long time, but eventually it'll happen. Or I'll throw it out. I don't know. But, I don't know. Kind of lost the thread of the question.
It's okay. It's a panel.
For me,
carry on.
for me, it's a situational, right? Total situational. For me, it's like the performative aspect where I have a truckload of material. I don't know what's going to happen. It goes to a location. Sometimes it's an exhibition space. Sometimes it's just a site. I prescribe to the Smithson site, non-site, situational aspect of how work lives in the wild world and in the cultural world. So
That's really interesting.
the idea of having all this stuff come, and I don't hardly handle it. I let other people do the lifting, and they throw it down, and then I hit it with the color. And it's something I never, I kind of like starting to get an idea of how I feel about it and what I want to do. But at the end of the day, it takes me where it wants to go. And because of what I've done in the past and my experience, I make adjustments and I do things, and then I take it apart and put it back together again. So it's never what it was originally planned to be. And that's the performative part about it. And some of you know also that when I make a work, I will make the painting in the space by throwing small plates of color on the floor. And the accumulation of that color actually makes a work that's never been made before, because it can't be made the same way twice. So that's the situation.
Yeah. In this kind of performative kind of situation that you've kind of set up, in terms of your own kind of relationship to authorship there, like, are you kind of like setting up conditions and then letting things kind of unfold, and then
Absolutely, yes.
and that's kind of the give and take?
Yeah, there's a trade-off with the authorship that I'm happy to do. I often invite people to join me. I love happenings. I love the history of happenings, and performative work. So people are welcome to pick up whatever is and add and partake in it. So again, the outcome is the outcome.
Well, it's interesting. It reminds me too, and just thinking about history again here, how much, so many of those ABEX folks were interested in happenings, participating in happenings,
Right.
as they saw it as this kind of extension really of like improvisation, chance, also kind of happening in the real.
Yes.
So it sounds like there's a thread there for you.
For me, yes.
Yeah, that's historical. Yeah. Liz?
I think what that brought up was, I've been lately trying to think of where my repetitions, habits come from, and then sort of mining my own subconscious is what I've decided. I think there's so much coming from the subconscious, and I think that was another thing that I was a little bit wary of, but instead of sort of sidestepping it, I was like, you know what, I'm going to catalog it. I'm going to start to make a glossary of all these things that are coming up and name them. And then if I do that, what happens next? So I think it's I'm not sure where that's going to go. I don't know how deep to get there, because also you do want to feel like when you're making a painting, you're just don't really know what's going to come next. At least that's how I work. And I think all of it, that's an element of abstraction, I think, a lot of the time. So, I think that's been an interesting, I don't know, we'll see where it leads. I don't want to define things too much.
Yeah, I mean, it also sounds like that whole historical arc of maybe on the one hand, we might have chance on the far end of a spectrum, and then we might have total intentionality on the other end of the spectrum, and maybe somewhere improvisation kind of dances in the middle of all of that, and that those things still feel very much on the table, these kind of classical, abstract kinds of things. It struck me in thinking about this too, Liz, you've mentioned things that felt like they were once off the table. And I think that's a very real moment. I remember being taught by people who grew up in the heyday of postmodernism, and it was like, you can't do this, you can't do that, that's too subjective, that's too poetic. There were a lot of things. And I inherited that, as a student years ago. So just to that, do we feel like there are things that are well, sure, abstraction's a wide open net, and Saul, even in his essay, was kind of there's a continuum, there's no singular movement. Is there anything that's off the table? Is there anything that's hey, you kind of can't lean into that because that would just be totally passé, cliche, without naming names? I know this is a public event and nobody wants to perhaps go on the record, but do you feel like there's something stylistically, aesthetically
there was always Greenberg, for my generation.
Yeah.
It wasn't postmodern. It was Greenberg that was the boogeyman. You could not make space. Wasn't no
Right.
space, not allowed.
No-
So
no
everything we did
illusion?
was
Yeah.
to try to subvert that and sneak it in. But it was definitely a rule. You couldn't do it. No space. So when I made Vertical Strokes, it was all about the stroke and the space were exactly equal. There was no space, those that has spaces between. I wasn't allowing space between. There was no between. It was all one next to the other, that kind of thinking. But I'm over it.
No, good. Because I would say everything's on the table.
Yeah, I'm over Greenberg.
I don't know if there's
it took
any,
about
yeah.
50 years.
Yeah, I think it looms over a lot of us, like even now. But like, I don't know, there's nothing that you can't do, but I wonder what's going to happen because I think there is a tendency with younger artists coming up where they might make like one abstract painting, one representational painting, and something in between. And I think that's good, actually. I don't have a problem with that at all, but it'll be interesting to see how people even define these things, because I think in a way we also have to think about the relevance of traditional media and things like that. So it's like the question of abstraction doesn't seem, I don't know, it doesn't seem to be there.
Russell, any thoughts?
No, I pretty much agree with that. It's kind of.
Well, something that strikes me is that while it might be a wide open net, I agree with Saul that like there's plenty of stuff that's still on the table. I do think there are some things that seem like they wade into, let's say, taboo territory. There's a lot of painting that I've seen at even some major galleries in the last, let's say, 5 years that feels very reminiscent of a kind of like abstract expressionist impulse, a desire for gesture and mark to have all of the kind of presence and subjectivity and emotionality. Even the way some of these painters are talking in an interview or in a press release kind of hints at that desire. And I'm questioning where that comes from. I'm questioning the relevancy of that impulse and how viable it is to kind of reconstitute that without maybe saying, hey, I know all that happened.
Yeah.
So just to kind of stir the pot a little bit, because this is a panel, something that I'm also thinking about is there's another impulse that's taking place, which is actually for a lot of spirituality and abstraction. We've seen maybe in the last 5, 6, 7 years, a lot of artists from a variety of backgrounds trying to engage in some way to kind of attach a kind of desire for greater significance, meaning, transcendence, something of the sublime, trying to infuse it with that. I also think there's issues here too. So just again, like, is there anything like that for any of our panelists? Or are you like, hey, everything's fair game. It's a totally pluralistic art world. And whatever you want to do, if you can get a market for it, go for it. Or are there lines for you in the sand, so to speak?
Market.
That's the line. Yeah. It shouldn't be about market.
Yeah.
That's the key. It's fine. Sell it.
I think you used the word that defined the answer to the question.
That is it.
Personally, because I think if something feels like it's spiritual, it's because all the elements came together on their own to be that way, not because someone painted a spiritual painting. That to me, I know when that happens. We've seen better paintings hundreds of years ago than the ones that are being made now to express that, because that was the reality of the time, and it was succinct to that. Now, if someone wants to paint a spiritual painting, I don't know how much spirituality, religious spirituality, is really around. To the point where it's coming across in a painting the way it would if you really took a really good look at Renaissance and pre-Renaissance painting. So that's the way I feel about that. But an abstract painting or a color field painting or a monochrome painting, if it feels spiritual, I think that's a byproduct of the essence of the piece somehow. And it's again, we go back to it being, I think for me, it's very individual. Someone could stand in front of a Klein, Yves Klein, and go, great blue. And the other person sitting there going, oh man, it's taking me somewhere. I don't know. It feels so spiritual.
I mean, well,
what do you think? I mean,
I think a lot of what you're saying is right, but I think I often think about this because I know I love a lot of spiritual painting. So I'm like, this is interesting. Like, why do I love this so much? And then I think, okay, I'm not religious, but if there's one thing that I'm doing, painting itself is an act of faith, or like making sculpture, making art. So it's like the artist may have a sort of relationship to art that is, in fact, spiritual in itself. Like, and that may come through. And then,
but we shouldn't let the market define how we should see that painting, right? Because that's, I think, the market's message is it's a honing down of the reason that painting is in the world.
So
that's a market that's a marketing tool that we all know is very popular and very effective.
So that kind of brings up another point, which I think is really interesting and maybe kind of depressing. But we all saw in the last, week and a half now, that a Giacometti sculpture and a Mark Rothko went at auction for enormous prices. I think they were part of Agnes Gunn's collection, if I'm not mistaken. And those might be two artists in particular that we often associate with ideas about spirituality, about subjectivity. We kind of romanticize both them as figures, and then we also kind of romanticize the works themselves. So, and Russell, you were kind of talking about hey, look, the market can kind of come in and start to kind of dictate some terms here. So where is the space in which we as artists, as an art world, kind of then somehow say, look, there's an alternative way to kind of establish meaning or value in relationship to that? Or is the market just a totalizing force that says, I'm the end of this story, whether you like it or not?
It's a challenge because I would say artist communities, if you're true to your community and true to yourself and you're making your work for the reasons you are making your work, you gotta, I guess, stick to your guns. It's not easy. And we all know that. Right, it's a lot. Money is very powerful, and that's like a whole other panel.
but it, yeah.
Well, it is. You got to keep the faith. I mean,
that's right.
Product.
Yeah.
Well, it seems as though that there's a few things dovetailing. It strikes me that when this group forms many years ago, obviously it's a very different New York City and a very different art world in which the kind of formation and desire for abstraction is at stake. And so maybe part of what we're seeing then too, in terms of like an economic situation that then starts to kind of interact with an art world, a community like this, is, how does that art world then reconvene? Is it in more localized spaces? Is it through groups? Is it through somehow finding community once again that kind of reestablishes or recalibrates the way we define meaning and importance, in terms of where people live, the proximity to where they are to the art world? What are, this might be kind of a bit of a digression, but, what are some of the challenges that you have faced as artists in order to kind of maintain this practice, perhaps in the face of all of these changes in economics in the art world in general?
Challenges, yeah.
I feel like I'm completely outside of it. I want to get back in, but I have withdrawn. I've not been with the gallery for quite a while. But I think practical matters are going to intervene, and I need to have a show once in a while and sell some art, you know.
I'll give you the Timothy Leary analogy.
You know?
It's like the economy is like a river. When you want to drink, you just dip your cup in.
That's
Right?
a good way to go.
So you don't lose your identity.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And that's capitalism, right? There's this river of flowing of money and systems. And, you know, if you're ready to drink and you want to drink, you make a decision. You dip your cup in and you drink. But, you know, some people drown. Okay.
Right.
And others float down the river. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like it was a challenge to separate those things for a long time. You know, like you think because I'm not showing at this gallery or that gallery that my work is somehow not valid, and I just think like, yeah, it is community that helps you realize that's not what is dictating the good work. And when we look back through history, yeah, it takes a long time for people to recognize a lot of work. So, you know, you cannot base your worth on that. You just can't. And yeah, I think the challenge is just affording to live in New York City. I mean, you know, that's like one of the things, but maybe you don't have to, because maybe, you know, I think younger people are not moving to New York and they're just like visiting and then living somewhere else, and they can do that because of the internet. And so, yeah, it's very different.
We might all have to move to New Jersey.
Yeah.
God forbid. I think no offense to any New Jerseyans here. I think one of the things that strikes me is that when Sharon had, in the earlier conversation, there was a desire to kind of like say, to talk yet again about provisional painting and kind of casualism. In that time, that was like the early 2010s, there was a number of things that were circulating just in terms of abstract painting discourse. I think about David's essay, Painting Beside Itself. You had Isabel Graw writing books about abstraction. You had a lot of people trying to kind of weigh in to like, where is abstract painting now? What's kind of at stake? There was another essay, DIY Abstraction, that was circulated pretty heavily at that time. And that we're kind of looking at a moment where there's a number of kinds of things coinciding. We have like the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, where collectors started to buy things online largely, and people started not frequenting as much in person as a result. And then we also had this opportunity for a tech sector to kind of bring in tech things like NFTs. Thankfully, they're gone. And in addition to a lot of other kinds of issues, an economic crisis, political polarization, global wars that took place. And so to make an abstract painting to some, and I'm just going to kind of pose this to the panel, is like, where's the relevance in that, right? Like you can almost kind of see them kind of like positioning themselves up against that as saying, well, somehow it's not engaging with the moment. What's your response to that?
I think it's the same thing I said before, where I think we actually do need to have something materially present and slow down enough to actually experience it and have that event. Mm-hmm. It's actually an experiential event that we need that doesn't happen on the internet.
Does it have to contend with all of those things in the first place? Some would say, hey, look, painting is painting. It doesn't actually have to answer all those questions. And then, of course, there's another art world, right? There's that we all know that is actually quite engaged with these things. Look, it needs to be responding to the ecological crisis. It needs to be responding to all of these issues. So, it's like, what is it?
I think there's a real need for both. Mm-hmm. For all of it. I want it all. If somebody can come along and make a painting about war that is, clear and powerful, good. We need it. We need it all. But it just has to be real, There's something going on. I'm just so overwhelmed by all the endless stuff to scroll through that I've even, it's starting to back off of all that, because I think a lot of people are. Too much.
Yeah, I mean that idea of the real, yeah, like I think that's where it lives, is like a relationship with an object, like, seeing it in person, and like the realness of being confronted with something. I think that's super valuable, and might be, I don't know, it might be relevant enough to break people out of some state. But it's not going to address everything, no. I don't know. Maybe also that spiritual component, maybe that kind of like otherworldly presence that color has, right? Like all these things, they don't solve anything, but I'm not sure. Like I do also love like any type of artwork, but I'm not sure any of it is going to solve everything. So
Yeah.
No, we're just about at time before we're going to start to open it up. But Russell, do you have any thoughts there?
I pretty much think that we need them both. And it's more than two. There's many. It's multifaceted, right? It's a lot of different ways. And I really do feel that no matter how much artists try, I think that there's a limitation on what the effect could be politically, socially, economically. Even if you go back to, actual propaganda painting, right? You go back to the propaganda from World War I, World War II, posters, all these kinds of things where artists are engaged in this direct, purposeful, like...
The Russian avant-garde.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sure.
Right? There's still
What
a
about WPA?
limited effect. And I think sometimes it could be overplayed, but we need it all to be able to see,
Yeah.
It just has to be good. That's the important. No, really. I've seen so much social realism because my father was a social realist early on in the 40s and 30s, 40s, 50s. And then he went to Europe and fell in love with Picasso and changed. But I've seen a lot of bad social realism. I want to see.
What market are you looking at?
Some of it is really good. And a lot of the
abstract painting has to be
WPA
good.
stuff was really great. Some of
it's
the
true.
stuff we saw in Mexico was amazing. Those murals. I mean,
True.
Fantastic stuff.
Let's end on the good. As long as it's good. All right, I think we have time for a bit of Q&A here. Would anyone like to speak into the mic and ask a question?
There's a hand.
Please speak into the mic.
Thank you for the interesting discussion. I feel like what was being danced around in the last couple questions, and so I'm going to pose that, is do you think there is an ethics or politics in abstraction or making abstraction, and how would you describe that? Because I feel like that was the undertone of some of the last bits of the conversation that I was hearing. Thank you.
Ask him.
I'm just the moderator.
I think about that a lot, the ethics of, but I think more about it in terms of my medium. I don't think about abstract as the main thing that I'm doing. Like, I think I'm a painter first. So there's a lot of ethics in painting, and like, what are you referring back to? And okay, now that you've painted on the side of your painting, you've changed the whole thing. And like, so there's all these rules to break or rules to follow. And I think it's kind of fallen away from abstract or not abstract. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I don't see where there would be a difference between the ethics of any kind of art making. It would be, the artist tries to achieve an honest result, something, but I don't know how you cheat exactly either. It's going to be evident, whatever you do. It may be, I think the audience will know if it's real or not. If it's somehow you're copying somebody else or you're pretending it's yours and it's somebody else's idea. But that really never works. It never happens that much that works. For me, the ethics part has to do with more with how people show their work and what the context they set up, and whether, in the old days, you weren't allowed ever to curate a show that you were in. That was like so taboo, couldn't be done. Now it's always done, almost all the time people are doing it. Also, you would never send out invitations for a group show. That was like beneath you. Now everybody, that's all we have is group shows, So those kinds of things have changed, but they're not about abstraction or actually art. They're just the culture.
I mean, maybe there's some kind of thing with like the decorative versus, where do you veer into
point,
the
good point.
decorative? Like, I think, if you were to show an abstract work, but it's somehow in the context of, interior design, does that change it? I don't think that's bad, but I don't know. Something like that.
Well, it strikes me, now I am the moderator weighing in, but it strikes me that there can be, or historically there has been a distinction in that, like Russian avant-garde is very much like telling you what the politics are. It is kind of didactic and instructive, and it's art for the revolution. And I think about, in contrast to that, other abstract moments like arte povera or neo-concrete in Brazil, where you actually have it's through the materiality and the participatory nature of the work and a number of other things that the politics or the ethics come through, but it's not telling you now comrade, come join the revolution. It's kind of like it's trying to perform it through its materialism, So I think there have been different ways of thinking about it. And so I think, yes, I think there can be an ethics in it.
And that Russian avant-garde was also squashed because it was powerful, and when anyway.
Ever since the first panel, and the way the show's curated, I've been thinking about the fact that there are no groupings anymore. Like groupings meaning minimalists or, we're all hard edge painters or we're all gestural. And I just wondered if you could figure it out. I can't. But why do you think there's no more isms?
Well, is it just because postmodernism kind of blew that all up? I mean, the idea of the new is over, that trajectory of art history doesn't really work anymore. What's going to be a new movement when we've realized that, I don't know, we have not realized anything, but some people have realized that, that there were other ways of making outside of this narrow European American context of art history. So it's that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's been written yet where we are now. I don't have a clue.
But it's less oppressive, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely wide open. Yeah. And I'm hoping also in this group, because Saul keeps trying to insert a more European point of view that we haven't really ever dealt with much. I mean, some people in the audience have, but, there's a whole context in Europe that's really different. Because I grew up in Italy, I know it's a whole different conversation. I show my work there, and the conversation is totally different.
That's right.
The whole history is different, the context, everything's different. And it's the same work. So I think we need to actually broaden the engagement. And also in South America, that's what you're talking about, we need to include that
Yeah.
stuff that we haven't really, we've been, New Yorkers mostly. We're not even that American.
So true.
Does anyone else have a question for our panel? Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to go back to the political. I don't know if you guys addressed it in the same way that I was thinking about something that Sam Gilliam talked about, how abstraction is political, and maybe how a viewer kind of opens up about differences in general.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, you're confronted with something that is like alien. You should be. Sometimes things can look familiar, but like, I think a good abstract work should sort of confront you with something outside of yourself. And so that's a good experience for people to have. I don't know. That's like
Kind of democratic in a way, actually, like that there are others, some of which you can accept, some of which you can't, and you're going to have to reconcile yourself to what that diversity looks like, right? Yeah.
and like ways of reading, like the reading the world, reading what a painting could be, or how to use visual language, or how to understand a different language, which is the visual language.
But there is something to that, I think, what Sam Gilliam said, Gilliam. And I also think it's really interesting that, it was harder for Black artists to make abstraction because it wasn't political enough, in the old days, not that far old either, but just recently. But now it really is wide open, at least in America. It feels like it is. I don't know about everywhere, but I mean, in a way, Sam was breaking a lot of rules when he did what he did, and it did feel political, even though it was totally abstract because of who he was.
Right.
So it's hard to. Without knowing that, I guess it's hard, but to know that, the work itself doesn't scream political. I don't know.
I think we have time for another question or so, if we have anyone that would like to ask something.
This isn't really a question.
One of those.
Yes. I think I don't think abstract is inherently political. I mean, when it first came into existence, it was a celebration that people didn't have to paint religious figures and the monarchy anymore. It spoke to every man, and it reflected the architecture and an entire movement at the time. And I think today it reflects free societies where things are valued and the act of creativity is valued. So it's a function of free societies, and it's a tool of free societies that puts value on creativity that isn't playing into the propaganda of the monarchy or religious figures or what the politics are of the day. And that's the power of it.
I love that.
Yeah, good point.
Any more questions? Okay, I think then we will thank our panel.